reason I gave the name about a colored girl was that's what we were called in the 30s. Okay, we were colored girls. Okay, so it's a pleasure to be with you all, really, and I enjoy telling the story. Oh, some of some of you may have heard this story before in reading about stuff I've done, but for those who haven't, um, so anyway, it's good to be here, and I will share with you looking at various phases of my life. I'm using the Eric Erickson sort of formula. I knew him, and I would say to him at conferences, please have a area that deals with blacks because our development is a little different than other development. And he was a charming person and very nice. He said, oh, Dorothy, I'll think about that. But anyway, so I'll look at childhood experiences, youth, young adults, middle years, and senior years, okay? But first, let me say where I come from. Mary Beth said about Barbados. My family was from Barbados. We were immigrants. Barbados in the 1930s, all of the population, at least 98% of the population were literal because the Queen, when enslaved people were freed, she believed in their being British subjects, so she didn't want them to be stupid. Plus, blacks were fighting for education. So she sent down some of her best people to educate folks. So the island were highly educated people. Now, Barbados at that time was nothing to do. You either worked in the sugarcane fields or some menial job. So the majority of people after they finished, what do they call it? But anyway, like a junior college, they went to England or they came to America. I have an uncle who went to England and he went to med school and he stayed in England as a doctor. But my parents came to America. So so that's my background in terms of, so they came with the feeling that education is very important. So I was instilled from an early age about education, but I didn't want to be bothered with higher education at the time. So it was a loving family. My father worked in a printing shop, but he left it because he was training everybody and they got promoted and he didn't because he was the only black there. So he left and he worked as a Pullman porter and later on cruise ships with the Rockefellers. I used to hear about them and so forth. But that's where I learned about good food because he'd bring home lobsters and stuff from Boston. From early age, I loved food. My mother stayed home with me till I was about 8, and she went into the factory and had special work as a designer for Saks Fifth Avenue and Bonwit Teller and those schools. So that was sort of my background. The other thing about my mother was how I sort of got interested in political stuff was there was always arguments on the weekends because our place was a hubbub for people coming in from the islands. They always came to Ernest and Lily's house. So Sunday was a big thing, big dinner, West Indian food and all that. And the discussion was always, America is not living up to its promise. We ought to go back, do something. So there was a Marcus Garvey movement, and his theme was, let's go back to Africa. So there were heated discussions on the weekend about whether you go to Africa or whether you stay here. My parents felt they were in America now, and even though there was prejudice, that they were going to work to see if they could better their conditions. So my mother got involved, one of the first Black women on a local level in politics. And her role with the local representative was to knock on doors, because we were an apartment building, knock on doors, because most of the people were immigrants in the house we lived, in the neighborhood we lived, to become citizens so that they could vote. That was her role. I would go with her and they would sit and talk and they would have cookies around. I'd have cookies and they would have tea because that's the English thing to have tea. And so I learned a lot about political stuff when there were meetings at the house and that kind of thing. So that sort of was the background at home. No, my parents were kind of strict. I couldn't do this or that, but it wasn't a problem in my early life. As a teenager, that became a problem. But anyway.
New York City?
New York City, yes, in Harlem. And we lived in an area that the Jews and the Italians and the Irish had lived, but they moved to better quarters in the country. Well, the Bronx was the country at the time. And they left beautiful homes, beautiful apartment buildings with doormen and so forth. So we moved in that area when I was a little girl. So I had my own room and, it was just lovely. Parquet floors and big windows, so that was it. So home was fine. But the institution, as they talk about here, the institution itself that I had to deal with was a problem. And the first one I had to deal with was school. Two things happened in school at an early age. One was a teacher. Had a teacher. And what was it, third grade? She had an assignment. Some of you may have heard this. She had the assignment that everybody come to the board and tell where you came from. Because the school I went to, the local public school, was mostly white. It was just two of us in the class that were Black. So anyway, wanted them to come up and tell where they came from. So there was the talk about Ireland, there was Italian with the boo, China, there was a beautiful Chinese girl in the class. She told about it. So finally I raised my hand. He said, all right, come Dorothy, you tell us where you come from. So I said Barbados. Well, there is her whole attitude changed. She said, you got to realize you came from Africa where they run around with spears naked, killing people. So that was my first experience. And I still remember it to this day.
Provosts are there, just reading them in the.
Could we please mute? So
everybody mute, please.
Thank you.
I moved.
Mute.
All right. So anyway, the point was she just was so devastated me by downplaying or really making a ridiculous thing about Africa. For years, I wouldn't even talk in class in terms of that. But so that was one of the many experiences in the school system. Teachers were no better than some of them are today in a sense. Now, in terms of students, to be dark-skinned was a mark of inferiority. So the light-skinned Blacks and the whites would, say, you Blackie, or why don't you go back to school? They knew I was West Indian from the way I talked, I guess. They said, why don't you go back where you come from? So I hear that today, I have to smile in terms of that. So we were seen as different because we were seen as immigrant. I was from an immigrant family. So I had it not only from the teachers, but from many of the students. So school was not always pleasant, but I remember taking, not trigonometry, it wasn't algebra, geometry in the next 2 grades or so. The teacher, she would give all the principles, the principle of geometry, and she'd give tests, and I failed all the tests. So, she never paid me any attention. And since I was failing, poor dumb girl. But when she gave the final test, a lot of stuff, I got 100. So she said, how did you get 100? Did you look at other people's paper? I said, no. What I think happened is I think I absorbed everything, but my anxiety and fear was so I just, didn't pay. But when the time came, I really did the best I could. So I was very surprised at that. But so after that, she was very nice to me. She just thought I was. So that was kind of the school experience that I had. growing up. So home was fine. The neighborhood kids were fine. So there was that balance in terms of that. Now, as a teenager, two things. Of course, my parents felt boys and books don't mix. And I felt, never mind the books. What about the boys? So I was interested in boys. And she said, don't you ever have boys in the house when I'm not home? So of course I didn't pay that any attention. I knew what time she'd come home from work. So I had my boyfriend there. I would kiss and whatever, but nothing serious like today, what they do. So, but one day she came home early. Anyway, he had to leave, but she wasn't mean to him. She said, you have to leave. But honey, I got punished bad. I got a beating for that in terms of that. So that wasn't nice in terms of that. Now, in terms of junior high school, there were more blacks in the junior high school. So it was a better socialization kind of experience there. So that was it. Then after high school, how it raised its head when it came to deciding on which high school you go to. I got a note from the guidance counselor saying I was going to the needles and something school, which prepares you for sewing and that kind of thing. When I told my mother that, she went up to the school the next day and explained to them, no, she wanted me in an academic program because I was going to college. So the teacher changed it, but she just had put all the black kids in this needle trade thing rather than giving us a choice in terms. So that was another kind of racial kind of thing going on at that time, that we weren't. And of course, the theories at that time, and I heard somebody talk about it on television this weekend, was blacks were inferior because they had a smaller brain and they just were not, they could not understand complex theories and so forth. And I had a time in social work when I started with that theme because the doctors felt the same way. The leading doctor in the agency I worked with would say, Dorothy, don't worry about trying to talk with these kids about anything important. Just give them some food, that they're poor and they're with family, because their brains can't absorb this, they have smaller brains. Actually said that. And I flipped, and there were other people, white therapists who felt as I did, but this consultant was the God at that time, so you listen to what he said. But the theory was really, how they treated people was really based on your race. Of course, I could only work with black folks. I couldn't work with white folks. But anyway, so I went to an academic high school. So after academic high school, I was ready for college. I told my mother, I'm not interested in going to college. She looked at me like I'm crazy. My father shook his head. So I said, okay. So I took the test for Hunter. I didn't pass it. I missed something, comprehension. I missed something. So she said, well, you have to apply to NYU. It's a private school. Apply there. So I applied and they turned me down, rejected me. Well, my mother didn't stand for that. They must have written, at those times was no telephone. So she must have written, they must have said, if you have any questions, call or whatnot. So she must have written a letter and we had it in, they returned her response and we went down. I can see us taking the train down to 4th Street to NYU. And we met with the dean of admissions. Anyway, mother explained why I should be accepted in the school. The report cards, and they all were A's. I was D in physics, something like that. But she made a good, she knew how to talk. She was a good speaker. She knew how to talk and defend why I should go to school, that this was a family interested in education and blah, blah, blah. So he said, well, I'll let you know. Sure enough, before the week was over, we got a letter saying I was accepted. I would say, you know, my mother did it. I mean, at that time, for a Black woman to go to a head of a private school and to be heard was unheard of, you know. So, and I didn't realize that till years later in terms of that. So I went to NYU, and that's where met Mrs. Roosevelt. Um, I, 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 I took a course in sociology, and it meant having a placement internship. So I was in a local boys club, and I liked kids, so I was working with kids. So sure enough, at this boys club, the leader must have been a very political person. He invited Mrs. Roosevelt to visit, told the staff that she was coming. And the staff said, she ain't coming to no Black school. Sure enough, Mrs. Roosevelt came. And I was asked to be on the welcoming committee. So see, these were some of the positives I had in early life that augmented some of the negatives. So she came. I'll never forget, she got out of this long black limousine and she kept going high because she's tall, you know, and I'm short. She was very charming. They asked her, where do you want to go? Would you like to see the kids' activities or go directly to meet with the community leaders? She said, no, I want to see what the kids are doing. It's a community center. So I took her around and others with her. And I'll just never forget how she walked that room, talked to the kids, asked them what they were drawing. She was just unbelievable, able to relate to these kids. And they were scared at first, but they talked to her. It changed my life in terms of what I was going to do, because I was going to be a chemist. So I changed to maybe I should do some social things kind of thing. So that was the experience with her in college. So when I finished college, I took the other social work courses. I knew I would have, if I wanted to be a social worker, I would have to go to a graduate school. So I applied to all the graduate schools in Boston, California, Chicago, everywhere. And the first place I heard from was Atlanta. So I said, I'll go to the first place that accepted me. My parents said, you're not going south. So she wrote her brother, who was a doctor, was one of the first doctors in Houston. And he said, send her south. You know, I'll make sure that she's all right, you know. So it was her older brother, so she listened to him. So I was prepared to go south. And of course, that was another experience. I noticed when we got to the train station, my father gave the porter, of course I went Pullman, you know, get away from discrimination. Gave the porter money. I said, what is he giving the porter money? I didn't understand that. At 18, I didn't understand. So anyway, I went on the train. It was lovely Pullman passenger. So they rang the bell for dinner. So I went to dinner, sat down, and the waiter came and, you know, said, what would I like? And I noticed he left me right away and pulled the curtain. I can still hear that of the curtain. What it was, whites were on the other side and blacks and whites could not even be together, okay? And I realized it was prejudice there. So I couldn't even eat my dinner. I went on back and jumped. So when I finally got to Atlanta and got off the train, I'll never forget, I was thirsty and I wanted, so this was my first experience in seeing a colored water fountain and a white one. And of course I went to the white one, I wasn't thinking, and there was a policeman not too far away and I began to tremble. I said, he's gonna lock me up because I took the wrong, you know, water cooler kind of thing. So that was my beginning. I must mention again in New York, as a teenager, I loved cooking, and my friend and I would want to go to the best restaurants in New York. We'd make reservations And we go and they said, I'm sorry, we can't serve you. We have a party coming. Or I said, we have a reservation. Well, I'm sorry, with some excuse. What I'm trying to get at is New York was as prejudiced as the South, but they didn't have the signs, okay? I couldn't try on clothes in the store. Even the local, we had a local department store in Harlem. I couldn't try on even a hat in the 1930s and the early 40s, okay? So different states deal with it differently, okay? Now, the good thing about going to Atlanta School of Social Work was it was a different experience for me because I was in a solid Black community like Lincolnville was in the 1920s and 30s. They had their own stores, their own businesses, their own drugstores, their own everything. It was great. When you went downtown, it was different, but you could do everything within the confines of the university and of the local community. So it was great. And I met students from other parts of the country, and we remain friends till today. I mean, we travel together, we travel with our husbands. So it was really eye-opener in terms of having a chance to feel better about myself. If I didn't understand certain concepts, I could go to the professor's home and get, you know, clarification of it. Whereas at NYU, they could care less, you know, they didn't even know your name kind of thing. So the shyness and the fear I had about relationships changed, and it was for the very positive thing. So that experience was good. The other good experience about going south was Atlanta. You had to go have an internship. Now, to have an internship in the late 40s in Atlanta, Department of Health or private agencies was a no-no. They had a few of them, not as many. So what Atlanta did, they used the plan that they have that Smith had, was to parcel you out to different parts of the country in your internship. So I was in psychiatric social work. So they found a psychiatric placement for me in Detroit. And I said, oh, this is wonderful. The further north you go, the less prejudice you'll have. So I went to Detroit to a child guidance clinic. One of the directors had been analyzed by Freud. You know, it was really so Freudian. It was more Freudian than Freud. So the first day I was there, I went down to the restaurant downtown to eat. So I said, you know, this is freedom. And I ordered breakfast, scrambled eggs, corn muffin, coffee, bacon. And I'm sitting there and I see people come in and out, white folks come in and out, and they ate and left. I said, I was reading, so I didn't pay attention in the beginning. I said, this takes a long time, shouldn't take it. So I said, where's my breakfast? We don't serve your kind. So I have to leave. If you want anything, you have to go to the back. So that was my first experience with Detroit. So I knew downtown you had to be careful. Now, the agency that I worked for, now these were highly experienced, qualified men and women in the social work field, okay? And I learned a lot. Let's see, I try to take good out of anything that happens negative with me. Of course, I only had Black kids and their families. The staff was very nice. And one day, when I gave my first case, they thought I did a good job and they wanted to take me to lunch. So I said, fine. So they took me to where they go to lunch. Nice place, tablecloths and so forth. So we got there and I must have been behind somebody because there was 5 of us. And when the waiter saw me, he said, oh, no, we can't serve you. They said, well, why not? They said, why not? So you got that colored girl with you. So that's where the colored girl. And they said, no, we can't. So we left. Now, if you're a social worker and you care about people, you care about feelings, you would think at some point they would discuss it. Never a word. It was like complete denial. We went to another restaurant, less fancy, and we had lunch. Not a word to me, not a word amongst themselves. So the extent up to the dealing with racism in the late 40s and early 50s was a no-no. They just could not handle it, okay? Because if anybody could handle it, it was people who dealt with all kinds of issues that people had, So that was a learning experience for me, but I got so much out of it. I learned about family therapy and group therapy, which was a new thing, because when I came back to New York and started talking about it, people were very negative about it at that time. And I learned play therapy, which I did a lot with kids coming to the agencies I worked with. So I had I'll never forget the experience I had here. So that was some of the experiences as a young adult in terms. So I came back to New York and I worked in agencies, and that's where that feeling of the Freudian concept was still very much, in vogue. And then, I did well with working with groups, and it was a book came out, and David Nolan found a book about working with kids in groups, because at that time in the early 50s, only individual work was done with kids. But a lot of kids from Fashion High School, which became the University of Fashion, the kids were problems, and they would come to an agency and they wouldn't talk. So I said, well, let's put them in a group. And Lord, we put them in a group and they just open up and tell you all their business and whatnot. So I became popular with that kind of stuff. So I got this position in Brooklyn to be head of a mental health clinic. It was just before the civil rights movement, or about the civil rights movement in the early 60s. And it was unheard of for social workers to be head of a mental health clinic. The psychiatrist was always the head, but it was an experiment in Brooklyn to have a non-medical person be in charge. And it was not only in Bed-Stuy, it was in Flatbush, it was in 5 different areas in Brooklyn. So it was a new experiment. Well, when I came to Bedford-Stuyvesant, which had been a small little clinic with 4 psychiatrists and a clerk, they all were white. This was in Bed-Stuy in the early 60s, mental health clinic. So when they heard I was coming, a woman and Black, 3 of the psychiatrists resigned right away. One stayed, a German woman, German psychiatrist, I never forgot her. She decided to stay, and we became good friends after that. But I just show you the feeling, even in the mental health field, about having to deal with a Black woman. I don't know whether their dislike was because I was Black or whether it was because I was a woman. It may have been both. Or, to have that kind of control in making decisions or helping to make decisions was not their cup of tea. So they left. The other thing I had to face in Bed-Stuy was the board, made up mainly of Blacks, did not want me. They said, we don't need someone coming from Manhattan. We talk today about territory and people, the rural area, and the city area, it's the same. Just like Father Ted talked yesterday about the eunuchs and Philip. If they don't know you, they're going to reject you. and they didn't know me. I was from outside another territory they thought about. So they tried their best for me not to be hired, but I was anyway. In 6 months, they all came back and apologized and thought I was doing a good job. And so, but I say that to say the tribal thing is so strong with people. We have to understand that today. And we don't do enough with the rural area. That's why we've gotten so much trouble and terrible trouble. But anyway. So, but Bed-Stuy was my pride and joy because it was a chance to really get Blacks who didn't believe in mental health services to get them involved. And I became quite well known there. In fact, they wanted me to run against Shirley Chisholm at one point. I said, no, she's a friend of mine. I'll never do that. So, but I worked to help educate the war on poverty. The people who worked, they weren't doing much of anything. And I thought they could do a service in mental health by taking information from the patients, clients who came in and talking with them and to give them a sense of not to be so anxious about seeing a professional. And it worked, So within a year, everybody in the community was using the clinic. I had trouble with the schools because any Black kid who acted up, they sent right away to the clinic that he was insane. And the kids weren't insane. So I had to have meetings, training programs with teachers in the local schools to understand the culture of Black kids, So it was a lot done in Bed-Stuy. And then I came to Stony Brook and further developed stuff there. But I don't know how time is going. I don't want that. So then after Stony Brook, of course, I came to St. Augustine. And my friends always said, you'll be back in 2 minutes, So that was in the 80s, right. Now, coming to St. Augustine, a little quaint town, as many of you know who've been here a while. I hate to see what's going on now, but we can't help that. Wasn't that many Blacks who were active in the community. I remember when I first came here, I came here with a friend of mine in Jacksonville before I moved here. And the one thing I noticed as we toured the place downtown, I said, where are the Blacks? I didn't see any Blacks. So I later learned, wasn't that many Blacks. And the Blacks were in Lincolnville, and they had been sort of gone through prejudice, and that was their home, so they stayed there. And that's still the same today kind of thing. But so when I moved here, I thought it's, like New York or whatnot. We go to restaurants, some of them, not all, go to some restaurants and we wait, the waiting game, and go to a local medical clinic with Rue, who had some little accident. That we sat there, they gave us a room, to medical examining room. We'd be in examining room and we would stay there half the day. So we left, So it was very much prevalent when I got here. It's different today. Kind of, but in the early 80s, it wasn't. Now, so my husband, of course, was from here, and we'd go to have dinner with his friends, and they would talk about all the good times they had. I said, well, I never heard nothing like this. So that's how I got to do pamphlets on Blacks, because I felt people did not know about Lincolnville and the beautiful community it had been in the 20s and 30s. The Jim Crow was such that they had their own community. So the racism continued. I remember once driving at night down A18 Beach Boulevard, after leaving a party by myself, and the police stopped me. And because I know you don't go over 30 miles here. And he said, where you think you're going? Put the flashlight in my face. So I said, I'm going to my home. Let me see your license. So I showed him. So he looked at me, said, all right, go ahead. So that's the experience I had with driving while black. But I must say with the police, when I had a bad car accident some years ago, Jody and them remember that, the policeman was the person who held my hand till the ambulance came, you know. So I've had good and bad experiences with police, but I tried to do what's right here, because I remember one night just 2 years ago, I got lost going to Grace, one of the churches downtown. It was nighttime and I didn't know where I was. So I said, well, let me ask somebody, go to somebody's house and ask them, one of these houses. But then I said, no, I'm not going because I don't know who they are. That is so much, and you may feel the same way too, but I just felt, I'm black, honey. They may, you know, not like it, or slam the door in my face or whatever. So I was careful about that. So that racial kind of feeling is forever within me, you know, even though things are good here. You just never know. You're constantly faced with it. And I see it's nice that you as white folks are learning more about it, because when I would talk with friends about it, they say, oh yeah, that I know, that's terrible, Dorothy, and we'd go off into something else, you know. But now it's such an emphasis on racial injustices, and you know, poor George didn't die in vain, that the whole world saw what I didn't even talk about as a kid, seeing men beat up to a pulp by the police, you know, right in front of you, you know. So there are all these experiences that I've had and other blacks constantly have. Even Scott, who talked the other night to rebuttal against Biden, talked about he stopped and whatever. Of course, he didn't see it as racism, but you know, that's Scott. But it's a constant thing, you know, and that's what it's about. Now, I think you as a group can do a great deal, because you can tell your friends about what you've heard, or, you know, there's so much, in fact, there's too much going on. I get tired of hearing all about, you know, other people's experiences, but you need to know about it, and it's made a difference. I think it's made a difference in the elections. I think it's made a difference in a lot of things that we do now. And, but the back thing is frightening to me. The fact that the electoral college has gotten 2 more votes from Florida and another vote from Texas doesn't look good, you know, but who knows? But we have to see the thing. I always thought, oh, well, this is fine, that's over with. You got to keep fighting constantly. That's bad news or good news in terms of that. And Nell knows about that in terms of her trying with the Democratic Party. So that was just some of the things I thought I'd say. So you know, time is getting by. So questions or comments or whatever.
Everyone is muted, so if you have, thank you. Oh my gosh, you're so dear. If you have something you'd like to ask Dee, please unmute yourself, and that way we can all hear you.
Dee, the Green Book, the film, you must have seen it, right? Do you remember seeing the Green Book?
Yes. My husband had one. I'm still looking for it. It's around here somewhere, because he had to use it when he came south with his kids every summer.
Right. Well,
And
next to the mission house is the old dilapidated house, which was one of the few in Lincolnville, which was in the Green Book. And do you ever remember that house being used as a Green Book? Did you ever see?
I wasn't here at that time. My husband was the one who would do that. I mean, he talks about traveling, how they had to stop and go different places. So he had a green book, so, but no, I wasn't in that era with him. Mhm.
Okay.
You,
Thanks, Dee. I really appreciate and I'm grateful for your story and your willingness to share. Did you have confidants through your career? Was there a person or people who you could turn to and confide in? I'm not talking about your mother and father, who sound like wonderful people, but as you progressed in your professional career, did you have confidants?
yes, throughout, that's a very good point, throughout my career, there was always someone positive, even at the agencies where the prevailing thought was a Freudian point of view. There was always a friend, the director, the assistant director, who was understanding and who would talk personally to me about what was going on. So throughout, that has been beside mentoring, that's always been someone positive.
Hi, this is Mignon. I thank you so much for the words you said and shared with us this morning. It reminded me part of my mother's story, who's from New York City. And some of the things you cited happened to me in my career. The point I want to draw out is that this continuation of racism for somebody my age, for what my children are feeling, is ongoing. And that's the shame of racism that has been perpetuated generation after generation after generation. And as the doctor pointed out, people like to bypass those conversations. And that's about the worst thing you can do on the topic of racism. If you don't bring it forward and talk about it, nothing is going to change. And the book I would recommend to all of us, which I'm surprised I don't have around me, is a book by Jamar Tisby. It's about racism. And I think, no, I don't have it, but maybe I'll get it and put it in the chat. It's just a wonderful book and leading us further in this discussion to end racism. He has podcasts and everything. So with the book, he's well known, he's on Facebook, and I would suggest that you reach out and learn from Jamar Tisby. He's a theologian.
Yeah,
Is it how to fight racism?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
We need the theologian people to speak up. I would love to see all faiths get together on trying to fight what's going on, but
Yes.
we're still so fractured that we're not doing anything.
And if we as Christians don't participate in that, I just don't understand where we're going.
For the group, this is what our racial justice initiative, Mary Beth, Melinda, and I, and everybody here is, we're getting involved in that. But what I wanted to say, Dorothy, I first started working in a juvenile training school in upstate New York. So some of your kids from Bed-Stuy might have come up to see me. I was there from 1965 to 1972. And one of the things that it dawned on me very quickly is that these kids were not dumb. They were what I called educationally neglected, because they could run a scam on me. They knew how to push my buttons, and they could joke, and they could come up with Mitch, the son of a you-know-what. And they were very entertaining. And it dawned on me early in my adult career that the racism is what kept these kids from being successful, not any kind of barriers. Of course, you were talking about how the doctors even said that there was genetic differences and everything else. And we had to overcome that, because when I was playing football, everybody said, well, you don't want to hit a black guy because he's got a thicker skull or something. There was crazy stuff. And of course, you just said, no, that's crazy. But, it is progressing. The problem I'm having is that I've now surrounded myself with like-minded people. And I'm almost afraid to go out and take on the Proud Boys, or, you know, I don't know where to go. You know, I don't know what we can do, because, you know, the folks at this meeting, I think we're all of like-minded. I don't think you would go to St. Cyprian's if you weren't like-minded. So I guess the question I have is, where do we go from here to get out of our tribe and see if we can impact on somebody else's tribe?
That's the big issue of the day. Yeah. And we have to impact some way. Someone said, well, there must be some people you can reach. If there's some kind of leader there that you can reach to start it off, that might be, but I don't know. You know.
We were at a party, and the mother of some our friends' grandchildren, their mother was there, and unbelievable. Down from New Hampshire, had the whole Trump mentality going, and everybody around us. Well, they didn't. I would have taken her on, but don't spoil the birthday party, you know. So we all just kept quiet and waited for her to leave. I wanted to spoil the birthday party, but probably wouldn't have done any good.
There's answers here, Tom, in this book.
But how to fight racism.
Fight racism. Okay.
And I will just give you some just for the conversation. What you can do, he tells you. Advocate for voting rights.
Yes.
That's one.
Number one.
That voting is straight.
Work for immigration reform. I don't know where you stand on this topic, but it's a big one. Pay reparations to Black people.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
They're doing that in California at the beach with a family. It's
And
wonderful.
also in Evanston, Illinois.
I think the voting is the key thing, because if we don't get in again in 22,
Criminal
we're
justice.
in serious trouble. So if there are priorities, that's one.
Criminal justice reform, particularly as Doctor was saying, this bill that DeSantis passed about voting. I mean, if we all don't get on that bandwagon, Lord help us. I mean, so if you go to this book, if you all want answers, I'll tell you.
What's the author's name?
Jamar Tisby.
So, excuse me, that's not a book that we've heard of, but it's very interesting. We are just about to start this book, but we can switch. We can definitely switch. We haven't started. And if you recommend that, I mean, why don't we think about switching over? This might be similar. This woman may not have the same notoriety or the same background. So maybe if you don't mind, Ms. Williams, we can talk about that.
Oh, I think it's beautiful. We just finished our work group. We had a leader that took us through. Unfortunately, she died unexpectedly last week. But I will tell you, it's a very interesting revelations in this book from my perspective. I'm quite sure it will be for most of you.
Miss Williams, where are you located?
In Westminster, up in World Golf Village.
Okay, that's where Catherine Vandenberg lives up there.
Yes.
Absolutely. Kathy and Jim are two of my besties.
There they are, and my piano instructor's bestie too.
Right.
But
And Barbara, is Barbara still on here? Barbara and I used to work at Xerox together.
really?
Wow.
Geographically separated.
Back in the day.
Yeah, because Clarine lives in Royal Gulf Village too.
But not at Westminster.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
But I hadn't realized the extent to which I knew the institutions were racist in a sense, but I hadn't. I think it's being all put together now that wasn't before, like the medical system, and I knew that there was difference in treatment between Blacks and white, but I didn't realize it was so pervasive, and it's so with all of those. So we really have to get out. It's all these institutions that are pretty bad, and of course the church is bad too in terms of Sunday. It's still the most segregated time in the country, you know.
Sandra?
Mega churches, some of them are solid for reactionary points of view. So it's really very hard. But the voting, I feel voting is very important.
The key question was, what can we do about it? Now, what actually troubles me is that it isn't the reasoning, it isn't the black skin that, people imagine that because you're black, you're stupid and you have a thick skull. Everybody knows that's not true. That's not true. So that's
Not everybody.
Not everybody.
Not everybody
Not
knows that.
Not everybody.
well,
I remember when that book came out and how many people were talking about it.
Okay, well, there are very few, but let's say
No,
Very few in
No.
England, Ivan.
okay, maybe. But my point is this.
you were in a different world, Ivan.
Maybe.
My boyfriend.
Let me just finish what I'm trying to say. So if reason tells you that someone who has a black skin is stupid, there's no point in even arguing with that. They must be mentally ill. But the point I want to make is they don't want to imagine that the black is equal to the white. So how do you fight that? They don't want to believe that, even though the reason tells them that maybe the black is even more intelligent than you are. So how do you fight the total unwillingness to consider the black-skinned person as an equal? I don't want to think about that.
This is what the book is going to, I think from what you've said, this is what the book is going to help guide us, what actually we can do. I mean, I find it also sad that it just.
Carol Ann and Sandra and Barb had their hands up.
Good morning, Dr. Isreal. I am so glad to see you today. I miss you so much. What I want to say is it's more of a comment than anything. Your innate ability to accentuate the positive is the end result of what we see about Dr. Isreal. It's just amazing to me when you talked about leaving and going to Atlanta and going to Detroit. The little tidbits, but you would always accentuate that word positive was always in there. And it's made you the person that I know and the person that I miss. And that's the end of my comment. But I will say this, the preface of, okay, what's the book we were going to do, Mary Beth?
So you want to talk about racism?
The preface knocked me out.
Yeah.
I mean, that book is for everybody. It's just wonderful. So that's just my comment on that. And thank you so much, Dee. This made my day. Thank you.
Sandra and Barb, and anyone else who has a comment.
Dee, I'm really interested in your thoughts about Lincolnville. During the 1980s, the City Commission made it a priority to improve the quality of life of people in Lincolnville. That was largely Henry Twine's initiative. And we built the Gallimore Center, and we rehabbed a dozen or so houses in Lincolnville with HUD grants. But the Black middle class, the teachers and the insurance people, salesmen and whatnot, were not interested in coming back to live in Lincolnville. And so our assumption that if we made the quality of life better, people would want to live there didn't happen. Instead, the developers got into it and started, changing it. So my question to you is, why did that go awry? Why would Black folks who would otherwise find good, wonderful houses in Lincolnville, not want to? And the second is, what do we have to do to have more African Americans attend St. Cyprian's?
Well, first of all, I think that there was another thing with Lincolnville is that a lot of the houses, the children left. There was no jobs here for the children, for the, you know, young adults to have. So they left, and the older people remained, and they couldn't pay the exorbitant prices. So it was two things going on. And I think that the people who had, the educated people, I think some of them felt they'd had it with being segregated. So they just wanted to get out there and be amongst everybody else and not be within Lincolnville. So those two forces going on, and it'll never be the same. I mean, it's a rich area. I couldn't live there. I mean, it's gotten to, but I think the educated people, in terms of your question, were that they had it. They felt they could move now and be more integrated. So why not develop that rather than to go back to Lincolnville?
Mm-hmm.
There may be other reasons, but that's one that I think of.
And St. Cyprian, what could happen now?
Oh, I don't know. You know, young people are not that much in certain organized religions anyway. So that's a handicap. I don't know, because we're an older group in the church. And as I look around, you know, we don't have, you're right, we don't have enough young people for it to continue. So I don't know. There are a lot of young people now in the community, but I don't know where they're going or if they're going anywhere.
Right.
You know, we're faced with a lot of young people who don't feel that organized religion makes sense to them.
True.
So would that fall under gentrification? As far as Lincolnville is, would that fall under that? Gentrification.
I don't know that it's so much gentrification as the proliferation of rental properties, some of which are taken up by Flagler students, but the prolific Airbnbs on South Street, well, throughout Lincolnville, the people buy up investment property for purposes of Airbnb. And so the notion of a neighborhood that has some kind of cohesion to it is not going to happen when a critical mass of the houses are taken up with vacation rentals.
That's for sure.
I do have one more book I just started this one, and down the road, I think this may be helpful to us. It's called White Fragility. Why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism. I think we've done such an interesting progress in our readings. We started with St. Augustine and its racial history, and then to Caste, which deals with how entrenched racism is. And then if we're going to, let's talk about so you want to talk about race, which will give us some tools. But the bottom line is our own fragility, our own willingness or unwillingness, and why. I've had 30, 40, 35 years working in diversity, inclusion, and equity. And I'm finding this book extremely insightful, and I found myself more often than I wanted to. And I think if you really want to do this, we need to understand why it's so hard for us to do it on a really deep and profound and change level. Pardon?
Thank you.
I'd like to ask a question of Dee. You've had a marvelous career, and I've wondered if somewhere along the way you've had a mentor to be at your back to help you?
Well, I had them along the way. First, I wasn't good at writing composition, so my mother had somebody, a friend of her who was a son, who helped me with my writing, which, you know, I never did good at it. So I'm surprised I wrote 2 books, 3 books. But anyway, along the way, it wasn't one person. It was accumulation of people wherever I was, who was positive and who really spurred me on when I felt, you know, I can't do it, because I always felt I can't do this, spurred me on. So each developmental phase, there was someone to be helpful.
And Dee, on that, was it a situation where you would reach out for support?
No,
They
I
came
didn't.
to you.
Yeah, I didn't reach out, but they realized I was hesitant to do what I was called to do. So they were supportive, you know.
That's beautiful.
And
Beautiful.
in Atlanta, there was a professor there who was always saying, "Come on, you know, you're doing great." And I said, "No, you know." In Brooklyn, there was the head of another program that was helpful. Stony Brook, everybody was supportive there. Where else did I go? Yeah. So wherever I've been, people have been helpful.
It's beautiful.
When I was working on my PhD, my person, the professor who was helping me, she was great, Jean. You know, we still communicate. You know, she wants to know how I'm doing and stuff. You know.
Nell?
Now I'm going to have a senior moment. One of the things I wanted to ask, I had to run off. It seems that they're spray painting condos here and they were afraid that our cars might get covered with paint. So I had to go move the car. My question is, when did you are in St. Augustine because of Rudy? When did you and Rudy get married along the way?
Well, you know, he was my first boyfriend when I came back to New York. And we had a wonderful love affair, but we differed on this whole concept of psychology. He didn't believe in psychology at all. He was like a sort of a socialist kind of thing. And he said, now, if we're going to get married, you have to give up that psychology stuff. I said, no, I'm not. So we fell out, you know. He went his way, I went my way. He got married, had 2 kids. I stuck with my career and I got married late. My first husband was a business guy, very narcissistic guy, but fun and whatever. And he passed away suddenly with cancer kind of thing. And we got back together because I heard Ruth's wife had died, who I went to school with, high school with. I kind of knew her, not too well. But so I invited him to my birthday party. He didn't come, my 75th or 65th birthday party. He didn't come, but he sent me flowers. I didn't know who it was from, but he called. And he said he couldn't come, but he'd like to take me to lunch. I didn't want to be bothered with him. So he called the next week to take me to lunch. And I said, no, I don't want to be bothered with him. We fell out. He's Marxist. I don't want to be bothered with that. So he called several weeks after, called. No. So he finally called and said there was a jazz concert. And would I be interested? See, I like jazz. So I said, oh, yeah, I'd go. So that was the story. Cool. So that's how we got back together. And the first thing he said when he met me was, he said, I am sorry that I didn't understand the importance of psychology. Yeah.
What a guy.
Well, that's good.
He was quite a guy. He was a beautiful guy.
Go ahead, Barb.
Yeah, just quickly, Dr. Isreal, I just wanted to say that your mother must have influenced you in your flair for fashion.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, I always look on Sunday mornings to see what Dr. Isreal has on. And I have a question that's a story, that's a discussion for another time. I'd just be curious to know what kept you at St. Cyprian's through the ups and the downs. The ins and the
Oh,
outs.
that's a very good question.
Yeah, and I just
You know,
want to
I
say,
was a crate, you know, my mother, you know, British, you know, is Episcopalians, you know, Henry VIII and whatever. So, in fact, at our house, we had a picture of King George on one table and Roosevelt on another table. Oh, I went to church every Sunday, Sunday school, church, everything went. But when I was a young adult and went back to the church, it certainly had gone down because the young kids had left, you know, for college and whatever. And it was just the old folks. And finally, they had to close it. And I get a little worried about St. Cyprian's in that respect. All right, so when I came here, as Sandra said, it was not much going on. There were very few members at the church. I would say 6 at the most. Because I remember the first Sunday I went, you know, got there 10 of 11.
Wow.
And 11:15, nobody. I said, well, what is this? So they, you know, came in. So these were the educators, the doctors, the you know, professional group. The ones that the 6 that had left were all in some profession, and the main person was Rosalie. You might have heard about Rosalie Mills. You know, she was there, and the organist was there. But all the young people who had made the church were. So anyway, so the second Sunday I went, the minister said, "Would you like to read?" So I said, "How could I read? I'm just getting here." But it just showed that there wasn't much going on there. And then the bishop brought in, well, I guess he brought in, I don't think he brought Dina in that quick, but it was someone else. Oh, the minister resigned and he brought in someone else. So, but it still remained a very tiny church. But then they brought in Adina, and it began to grow. And then they brought in Father David, and it really grew. It grew beautifully. It was a beautiful church. But David, who's still a friend of mine, and God bless him, when my husband passed away in Jacksonville, he got out of his bed in St. Augustine and went down to say prayers, because I was in southern Florida at his nephew's birthday party when it happened. And I called Father David, and he got out of his bed and went to Jacksonville to say prayers. I'll never forget him for that. Wonderful person, but he's conservative, you know. So when the split came about, mainly homosexuals and whatever, you know, there was this split. So I stayed. I said, you can't treat people, you know, we treat people, because I had gone through that with homosexuals in the 60s when they said it's a psychiatric disorder. And we gotta, when you work with them, you gotta change them. And I said, no, I ain't changing people, you know, all that kind of thing. So the bishop came and said, look, you know, you gotta decide what you want to do. And it was a mess. So the bishop said, Father David, if you can't do this and that, you have to leave now, which was awful. Could have given him a couple of Sundays. So that's how that split came. So it was decided at the Sunday, it was the last Sunday, what the congregation felt. Did they feel that the conservatism, the homosexuality, we should go along with or not? So everybody went with Father David. Many of them went because it was Father David, not because of any sort of it. So I and 4 others, one side of the church, we stayed.
Oh, she can't hear her.
Dina was there, and then we had someone who wasn't so hot. And then we had Father Ted, who really built it up.
and thank you for the reading yesterday. I took home God is love, love is God, God is love, love is God. all the way home with me and woke up with it this morning. So thank you very much for emphasizing that yesterday in the way you read the reading.
Yes. Dee, we are so grateful for your, for you and your willingness to join with us today and share your story. It is truly, truly remarkable. You are, you leave an amazing legacy. You are a legend and a legacy, and we're beyond grateful to have you with us. Just jumping to the next week, we have to figure out what to do next, but we will get with you on that. And meanwhile, we just thank you, Dee.
It's nice to be here. You know, I enjoy doing this.
We're going to order the book.
Everybody.
It has been such a delight. And I want to reiterate what you said twice, that voting is the most important thing. And someone, I can't remember who said it, you know, it may have been Ivan, but how do we begin to talk to people who are already set in their ways and they don't want to hear the truth? I think the way we change perception about race is through voting and having more people of color in positions of power, positions of authority,
Absolutely.
as examples for everyone. And then it becomes second nature. Eventually, this is my dream, eventually it will become an accepted, just a norm that what was the social Darwinist craziness that we who are old enough were brought up with, about the physical and mental differences between the races, was idiotic and a lie. And I think that voting is key, as you said. So trying to talk someone out of his or her views about race is pretty darn tough. But I think that changing the system through voting eventually is the way we change people's views.
Amen.
Still have to reach people who don't agree with us. You know, that our housing, there's so many ways that people are not together. We have to reach people who have doubts about what's going on, you know. I think that's one of the early steps we have to make, not just us, but reaching those who are. I have a friend, you know, we don't talk about, he's a staunch Republican at this point, because the Republican Party is Trump Party. And so for a while we didn't discuss it, but then I would bring in some humor. I said, you believe in that? And he said, no, you know. So he's gotten a little better at it. He still is with Trump, but it takes some doing, you know. You got to keep at it if you have a friend who's really on the other side.
It's that one person. There was somebody in my life I was ready to kind of wipe out of my life. And then I thought, no, she has, I'm one of the people she goes back to my work years. I'm one of the people that she thinks highly enough of me to listen to what I have to say. So, you know, I wait for my opportunities and they pop up and we have a conversation.
One of the good things that is happening is that under the Biden administration, he's putting in people who are responsible for the various different departments. He has all kinds of wonderful things that he wants to do to help people at every level. And the people he's appointed represent America, whether they're Hispanic or Native American or African American, and there are lots of women in there. And it's a whole new world that we're living in. And once some of these things get out into the general public and people that have been disadvantaged all of a sudden see, oh, look, I can get more money. I can get better education. I can take advantage of a lot of things that happen. I think that also will make a huge difference moving forward. We just have to pass some of the laws in Washington and hope that some of the money that's coming down to the states will actually be used. I know that our legislature is not using all the money that they have access to that is coming from the federal government. But this is one way that people, a lot of what has been stirred up under Trump might start to settle down, you know, as we're moving forward. And that we just have to pray is going to happen.
Trump
I
is,
think that our present president was the best person we could get for this time. I don't think there's anyone else who could do what he's trying to do, you know, so that's a benefit as I see it.
Okay.
Well, God bless you all for being here today, and we will stay in touch. God bless.
Hi.
Thank you, Dee.
Andy,
We
it's
Thank you.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Take care.
wonderful to see
Thank you.
everybody.
Be safe, be safe.